So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and before we get going it's worth saying that I have been struck down with the affliction, as we shall refer to it as. I've managed to get away with not being infected for so long, and now here I am suffering underneath it. But we'll see. I mean, I'll record the intro at the very least, and if my voice doesn't hold together, then I'll maybe try and ration out the recording sessions a little bit while I'm off work with this illness. It does give me an opportunity to record a little bit more, provided that I feel up to it, I suppose. So there is that. So we'll be able to squeeze in a little bit more than I was thinking, and it means we'll be able to move straight on with this EDORAS replay, which was sent to me by Y2K86, I believe it was. And this one's going to be a very chaotic one, just because all of the units, well, we'll see based on the units that some of the factions have, which they don't usually have access to, that the additional units that are often hidden in a faction have been activated for this one. So this one's going to be Pandemonium, basically. It's going to be just all-out chaos, and that was intentional. So it's not going to be a lore-friendly battle, and nor is it going to be a battle with a rigid set of rules and structure. This is instead just going to be a bit of madness, which I think fits my current mood quite well, to be honest with you. So it's EDORAS as well. EDORAS is quite a difficult settlement to defend at the best of times, but with all of these tools that the defenders have at their disposal now that the factions have been opened up a little bit, they do have maybe a slightly better chance, but this also applies to the attackers. Open settlements like this, as has been mentioned a couple of times recently, are more difficult to defend on, just because the attackers can use their own skirmishers on a settlement like this to greater effect. And if they're able to do that, then it makes the defender's job just that much more difficult, both in using their skirmishers effectively and just taking more damage, which oftentimes they can scarcely afford to do. But we'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost, starting off, yes indeed, with Y2K himself, who's playing as Arthedain, but we'll see that it isn't just Arthedain that his ranks are comprised of. A couple of units of Dundland scouts, not necessarily the worst thing to bring in a situation like this, horse archers, because EDORAS is so open, and we have seen in the past some mass sally outs from defenders. Very successful mass sally outs as well, where they've gone after high priority targets. One against Mirkwood in particular springs to mind, where they flattened Mirkwood almost completely, the defenders, with just cavalry. So having units like this allows you to come to the aid of your allies, or of course defend yourself, but Arthedain are in a position where they're going to have to go through other armies before they actually get out through the gatehouses that are set up. You can see that Arthedain do have access to quite a lot of the Shire's roster here as well, so they've got battling Brandybucks, and it does fill, I suppose, a bit of a void in terms of low tier armour piercing that Arthedain usually have to contend with. So they do have some battling Brandybucks, as we've already mentioned, and some Farmers of Buckland as well, pushing up these rams. The Farmers of Buckland in particular can be really savage, but this really only pertains to their charge bonus, otherwise they're just your standard mid to upper tier kind of flimsy shock infantry. But they are savage, as with most of the Hobbit units, surprisingly so. Dundland Peacekeepers are a very different kind of strategy is what they employ. They don't have armour piercing, but they are of higher quality themselves, and they'll be able to do a lot more damage to more lightly armoured foes. More Peacekeepers. The Proudfoot Protectors are another really nice addition for Arthedain to have, honestly. It adds to their already substantial lineup of pikes, but it also fills a gap in their ranged repertoire that they don't usually have filled, which is of course crossbows. So having access to this is a very fine thing for Arthedain indeed. Several units of bandits, just to add a little bit more in terms of regular javelin men. Wardens of the North, armour-piercing arrows from afar, we've already mentioned on this map. Enemy attacking archers can be very, very effective. Several units of upgraded Evendim spearmen, and also some fully upgraded Arthedain and men-at-arms in behind. And that's just about it, but the split between Arthedain and the Shire very much apparent. And then we move on to the Neutrals, a faction which doesn't actually show up unless you activate it to be so, and you can see that they are just complete chaos throughout. They don't have any rhyme or reason to them when you can play as them. It does mean that you can build a surprisingly diverse army though, as Medexa I'm sure has done. Warriors of Khazad-dûm represent a very fine unit of standardised line infantry, pushing up the rams. In behind you can see Morroquendi bows, which represent a high damage, heavier Elven archer, although in the Morroquendi's case their armour values are still a little bit on the low side. Poison projectiles as well help their case. Mercenary Guildsmen, a fairly cheap and, at least in melee stats, effective armour-piercing line infantry unit, but their low morale does come back to bite them more often than not, and especially when they're on the attack in a siege and put under pressure on EDORAS' streets. could end up being quite difficult for them. The Drake Broodlings and the Cave Trolls, representing the mass-pushing capabilities from the Misty Mountains, being added to this faction as well. Keep them moving and they'll definitely serve you well. The Mercenary War Chiefs are a unit that you can't get anywhere else, in much the same way that the Orthanc units are for Dundland. This is kind of a completely unique thing for them. They are a two-handed unit, a decent one as well. You could look at them as being somewhat similar to something like the Black Uruks of the Mountains, for example. It does mean that there are obviously going to be heavy swordsmen in the game that are going to be superior to them, but it's a neat thing when you see units that are no longer in the main rosters still occasionally stick their head out from the game's code. Spears of Orthanc are here as well, so this is of course the Dundland Crossbowman. The Scouts are here as well. This is a unit actually which was a vanilla unit, which is still technically in the game here. They were the regular archers for Mordor way back in vanilla 3rd Age, so the fact that they still exist in the game at all is kind of impressive. And here they are filling the role of Medexa's archers. And another unit that we haven't seen in quite some time is what used to be the Misty Mountains pikemen, the Mountain Uruk pikemen. So there they are, filling the role of phalanx, and then of course we have the Ents as well. It's worth saying that some of these factions probably don't have their rosters expanded all that much. Isengard, played by the Dwarius, is probably going to be a faction which counts itself among that number. I don't think they gain much from having the rosters expanded, which means we're going to be seeing much the same thing that we always see from Isengard, an army built around the Uruk-hai infantry, the Uruk-hai pikemen over there, and probably Uruk-hai crossbowmen as well, although perhaps not. Well, yeah, there are some Uruk-hai crossbowmen actually. Uruk-hai infantry, Baneguard, the Guards of Orthanc, the heavy spearmen are here in the middle of this box, perhaps preempting any sort of sally out from enemy cavalry. I don't think there is actually going to be a sally out on this occasion, but it's worth preempting that when you consider what this map is all about. Uruk-hai infantry, and then we also have some heavy trolls of the White Hand as well, which, considering they can add themselves to the Cave Trolls and the Drake Broodlings, it makes for a potentially quite scary alpha strike, which the defenders are going to have to be wary of on this side of the battlefield. Meanwhile, we move on to Umbar, played by her Tumihai, which they do have their roster expanded a little bit. I'm sure that anyone who's been watching the channel for a little while, will remember these guys, the Corsair Savages, the shirtless hooligans. They represent a low-tier armour-piercing shock infantry unit that Umbar used to be able to have access to, but it was removed mostly because Umbar don't really need these Corsair units at the low tier to really be effective, and for the most part I would agree. I think they work better as a high-tier faction, but still they return. Obviously going to be very bad under arrow fire, but this is a lot of armour-piercing they have access to, and while the Belagai pikemen represent the regular rank-and-file pike unit that Umbar have in the present day, it used to be these guys, the Corsair pikemen, who have long harpoons instead of actual pikes, which I've always liked the piratey aspects of the Corsairs. They are a little bit lighter on Umbar's roster these days, but still nice to see them back. They are of course very vulnerable to arrow fire as well, so under normal circumstances Umbar do quite well under enemy ranged pressure, but with the Corsair and especially unshielded Corsair focus that they seem to have here, they're going to be a little bit more under pressure, you would say. Corsair Archers as well, another unit which was around but way back in vanilla as well. Again, a very light unit of archers indeed, not unlike the scouts that we saw in Medexa's army. And he does have Corsair Crossmen hidden, so this is almost an entirely Corsair army led by a couple of units of Black Numenorians here at the back. Corsair infantry, of course, double as light infantry in melee as well. They don't have that many volleys in them, but perhaps they don't need to. And then a couple of units of Balakith Axguard either side of the true leaders in this situation, the multiple HP two-handed swordsmen that are the harbingers of Castamere. Now then, moving on to the final attacking army, we have the Hobbit folk, and I don't think their roster will be expanded all that much. I mean, the fact that they are already leaking into Arthedain's army is already a testament to what they can inflict upon other factions. I don't think it's going to affect them too much. The Gandalf's fireworks, under normal circumstances, the Hwacha for an attacking army is maybe not ideal. It can break walls, as we learned in the patch preview in the Rovanian battle we did about a month ago at this point. However, on a map like this where you can shoot over the walls into the defensive positions, it can be pretty scary actually, because you're bound to hit something on the hillside. So the defenders will be wanting to take out that artillery pretty quickly. 3 units of Proudfoot Protectors are going to be really, really devastating once they get set up. Got some battling Brandybucks in the middle of several units of Hobbitry and arms as well, and a unit of the black-clad bandits. And that's all that we can see, but there are other units hidden in behind, including farmers and more bandits. So moving on to the defenders. Imladris, Numenor and Rhudur are the unlikely alliance that we see. Babos, playing as Numenor, has got some Balagire archers ready. I don't think Numenor's roster will be expanded too much. I know there's one extra unit they gain access to. Actually, no, it's two, isn't it? Yes, indeed. So the Numenorian Shield Guard are here, an armor-piercing spear, but they also gain access to the Temple units from Mordor, including the Temple Guard, with a brass coloration as well. So that's kind of interesting, the fact that they don't simply get the silver ones that Mordor have access to, but a more resplendent one, perhaps, for the Numenorians. An armor-piercing archer, which of course is fantastic in melee as well. We've got some Balagire archers, we've got some Pharazim swordmasters, Numenor Royal Guard and sentinels, more Shield Guard, and then the Royal Legion of Armenelos as well. So a really strong force down here. Plenty of Black Numenorians in the Numenor, these really strong bodyguard tier units as well that Numenor have access to. Numenorian steel bows are lined up on the back entrance to the town centre. Seafarers and Nindamos are at the top of the hill also. We have, oh boy, Tiz Nichov, who is playing as Imladris. He has got some Imladris sentries, some Gwythi Myrdain. I'll be really interested to see if Imladris have any hidden gems, which I've been completely unaware of for a while. Rhudur, I'm not so sure. They might have one unit Rhudur, but we'll see. Arthedain Berserkers are here. Ferodrim Javelins, also a fantastically damaging unit. Broinen River Wards we've seen before. The Trebuchets in a menacing position on top of this hill, including two units of Rangers, the Arthedain from Rhudur and the Arthedain from Numenor. We have some Broinen River Wards, some Elder Enway Swordmasters. This is another unit I was expecting to see, the Numenor reskinned version of the Alcarondas Legion we usually see from Umbar. I do prefer the Umbar coloration, but it's neat that this one exists as well. It's nice that the Numenor versions of these units actually have a different skin. It's not the sort of thing you'd expect to see, especially something which is, technically speaking, so well hidden within the game. But here they are. Imladris Guardians with the upgrade, Elder Enway Archers, two units of the Mighty Witch Realm Enslavers. Further down the hill we see Essenmoor's Troll Hunters, plenty of pikes as well, Arthedain pikemen in numbers. So certainly a very quality heavy defence this. They were certainly given enough numbers to bring everything they wanted to. Some Dunman Hunters ready to shoot immediately. Black Walls, the armor piercing, will be very handy against Isengard as they move forward. And there's plenty of these regular archers from Rhudur on the side of the settlement. I was kind of expecting to see Rhudur Axemen, the axe unit that Gundabad had way back in Vanilla. I don't know if maybe that's been removed. They were terrible. They were hybrid melee and javelin unit, but it was back when the game was significantly less well balanced than it is now, and they were really poor. But it would have been nice to see them nonetheless. Trollshaw Axe Throwers are here, Alcarondas Legion, and then further down there is actually a cavalry unit here, interestingly enough. Some Spears of Rivendell, Gwythi Arthand and Swords of Rivendell locking down this front. The Gwythi Rockdor are here, but I mean, if they go out, I'm sure they're going to get sniped out by the crossbows that Umbar and the Hobbits have at their disposal. Noratino Warriors and more Black Walls down here as well. There may be some hidden units for the defenders as well. I don't think there's going to be too much need for a cut, honestly, considering the range units are already here, and considering this is meant to be a bit of fun, I'm sure that the attackers will regale us with an aggressive display and the defenders will give as good as they can get. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. I have to say, I am really looking forward to this one, because I can't really imagine this is going to be a typical siege by any stretch of the imagination, given the rather creative units and compositions that we've seen out on the field. Perhaps Isengard here represent the most run-of-the-mill army that we see, which is not too surprising given Isengard's rather regimented roster. At any rate, it does look as though they're going to simply try to go back into a little bit more of a passive state just for the moment, and wait for their allies to get into a slightly better position. I mean, the defenders are not going to allow the defenders are not going to allow the attackers to simply do as they please indefinitely, though, with the archers already having opened up, with the artillery already starting to attack the neutrals over here as well. They can't really afford to allow the trebuchets to get some nice hits on stuff like the Drake Broodlings and the Cave Trolls, because that represents an awful lot of value they can get very quickly. And there you can see it. One hit killing off 3 trolls. It may not be kills by volume, but it certainly is kills by quality. It's quite rare that you see artillery able to snipe out trolls at this distance, though, in spite of their bigger size. Artillery does have a tendency to not cooperate when you truly need it to. But on this occasion, it does appear the artillery for now, at the very least, is scoring at grazing hits at every opportunity. The Gwaithir Rhudur now moving out into the open field as well. The Nortino warriors starting to shoot at the approaching attacking armies too. The Gwaithir Rhudur do represent a real problem here, because I mean the Proudfoot Protectors are moving forward. They can do a lot of damage in melee to something like the Gwaithir Rhudur, as I'm sure we will learn quickly, but off the charge at the very least, a lot of these poor hobbits are going to be trampled underfoot by these swift elven riders. I don't know whether you could say that's worth it in the long run though. I mean, the Gwaithir Rhudur is still healthy enough to be able to continue, and the Proudfoot Protectors represent such a threat that maybe you could say that if you could do more damage then it would be worthwhile, but the problem is you're still in range at this point, and a few withering crossbow volleys, and it's one of the most difficult units for a unit of cavalry to deal with, I suppose, because once you're in range of them, you're going to get shot up in melee. Nothing will melt cavalry quicker than pikes. The only thing that holds pikes back as an anti-cavalry unit is their own mobility. But the Gwaithir Rhudur, I think I would just leave them out in the open field for now, and hope they don't get chased down. Nortino warriors firing at the hobbits on the approach. They're having to loop their shots a little bit, which is kind of unfortunate, but they are killing off plenty of hobbits on the approach, and Nortino warriors, especially against hobbit armies and a largely Corsair focused Umbar force, they could be just as useful, to be fair, as a melee force in this situation. Meanwhile, we're going to be seeing a lot of the Rohan palisade walls fall in little cutaway clips from now on, I'm sure. The first of which, the second as well actually, the good courtesy to do so at the same time at the very least. So the Warius and the Medex are going to be moving forward in large numbers quickly, which is good. EDORAS does represent a good opportunity, at least early on, for the attackers to really attack multiple angles. Very rapidly that does funnel into two approaches for the attackers, which can be quite difficult to deal with. Arthedain pikemen here in such numbers as well represent a very solid front line for Rhudur. Shielded pikes are a rarity after all. We've already seen that the Rovanian in the next match are going to be gaining a shielded pike unit as well, so that is something worth considering. Imladris are going to be moving back onto the hill relatively quickly here. Most of Arthedain appear to, in fact all of Arthedain are going to be coming around to this side. Javelins you can see going after the black wolds there. You can see the Gwaithir Rhudur are still damaged, so they're taking even more damage as well. I mean, they're going to be in range of some Corsairs. Plenty of projectiles there, doing their grisly work on both sides of the faction divides. I mean, there are so many holes in the wall now. But Isengard and the neutrals will have to make do with just themselves over here, with Arthedain committing all of their army to the other side. Perhaps that's why Imladris elected to pull back so quickly. And I mean, there is the beginnings of a retreat from Rhudur as well, so if they are going to move forward aggressively, now would be the time, I think, for the attackers. And I mean, these archers are very, very exposed. Mercenary guildsmen may have their fragilities. Really? There's 82 of them and they were in melee against Dundland hunters and they routed. They must have been getting hit by some of these marksmen up on the bank or something, because that's crazy. Their morale is terrible, but you'd expect a little bit more. I mean, as a mercenary, surely your living is based upon your reputation. Say the mercenaries' reputation in Middle Earth, based on the morale of them in Reforged, must be in the gutter. The hobbits are managing to get into the settlement though, unimpeded for the time being. There are several roads up here, but I guarantee this is going to be... it's going to be tough on the light armoured units here, of which there are many for the attackers. They're going to be leaning quite heavily on the more heavily armoured offerings from Isengard and Arthedain if they are to gain traction in this fight. You would suggest the Atomor's Troll Hunters here don't really have too many ways in which they can retreat. I mean, they're continuing to throw their javelins in. Troll Hunters. Are they going after the Cave Trolls or are they hitting the Vanguard? I can only assume they're going after the Trolls, correct? Yeah. You can see that the Trolls do take a bit of a beating, even at the hands of Javelins, but several of them are now bloodied. The longer the Trolls just stand there, the more they're going to come to regret that decision. This is one of the things I've always said, like Trolls, when it comes to dealing with Trolls with projectiles, you need to have such a strong projectile in order for it to be effective, because individually they can take so much punishment. Especially in the way that Reforged is set up in its current iteration. It's a little bit different in the likes of Divide and Conquer, where you can position such against the AI, and you don't want to be sending your infantry units into the slaughter against Trolls, which it can often seem like is their fate when you do so. Efficiency is the name of the game, in terms of keeping your units alive, whereas in multiplayer it's not going to be as easy to do such things against human players. Troll Hunters are having to leave. I mean, ironically, the Troll Hunters, we've already seen their Javelins don't kill off the Trolls that quickly with their Javelins, and then in melee, because they're Spearmen, Spears are actually not what you need against Trolls. The Spear Malice is in full effect, because they do count as infantry. Bandits are coming in alongside the Cave Trolls. I mean, the Cave Trolls are weakened now though, so against solid enough infantry, they're going to struggle. These Dundland Hunters, it's kind of hard to differentiate them from the Bandits with the brown colour scheme that both of these units have. But now, surely the initial defences are going to get overrun. Alcarondas Legion going to make the attempt to bring down the Trolls. Forward comes some Corsair Savages, meanwhile over on this side of the battlefield. This front line is also well underway, with Imladris facing off against the initial incursions from the Hobbits and the Bandits. The Arthedainian Bandits and the Bandits from the Shire itself. This is the situation which the Spears of Rivendell should do very nicely. You know, you can see the Gwaith the Arthedain very close to the action, which is all well and good, but they are getting hit by the Wards of the North. And given how much punishment the Gwaith the Arthedain are capable of taking in melee, this is certainly not a bad idea at all. Honestly, one of, if not the most impressive infantry unit defensively, keeping itself alive in the game. Well, already you can see that it's turning into a fairly chaotic affair over on this side of the battlefield. The Alcarondas Legion are doing fine for the time being, but they will be overrun eventually. They are going to bring down the Trolls, which is nice, but following through now are going to be several units of armour-piercing shock infantry, as I will be cutting all of that out, naturally. As I was saying, all of these archers are going to be really, really bad for these Corsair Savages, and even the Vanguard, who have got slightly better armour values, are still going to struggle, although all of the armour-piercing will be good against stuff like the Alcarondas Legion. The Mercenary Guildsmen, even here, they are struggling a little bit in terms of their morale. Even when the momentum is fully on the attacker's side, they are thinking that, you can tell they're thinking about fleeing. Maybe not too surprisingly when they're taking point blank throwing axe volleys like that, but even so, a lot of the Isengard units are pushing very far into enemy lines. They're not going to get much further. I mean, they might be trying to interrupt the throwing axes, but it's not too surprising to see them rout in the face of all of the higher tier Numenor units. I was going to say Umbar for a second, but so used to the Alcarondas Legion unit for them. Alcarondas Legion over here, barring the progress of some Arthedainian units and some Corsairs also heading around this way. So it is actually going to be the Corsairs that are going to be dipping into both sides of the battlefield, acting as the supporting faction. With Imladris coming back down the hill as well, it's not looking that good for this little splinter of the Alcarondas Legion. There's almost a mass pushing like feeling to this assault from Arthedain. Defeat is a distinct possibility for them. Still some Corsair Savages ready to be committed as reinforcements should the need arise. There is also, I mean, they are being precious about their skirmishers being caught in melee here, the defenders, which is maybe going to come back to haunt them later, but for the time being it's made for an interesting dynamic. Rhudur marksmen standing and fighting once again, another example of the Mercenary Guildsmen running for the hills. I do believe the Mercenary War Chiefs are made of slightly sterner stuff, but they are much fewer and further between, even when the neutrals are involved. Defeat seems certain for this small amount of Outer Legion that still remain fighting in the first layers of EDORAS. A bit of armour piercing, a bit of extra quality in defence in the Uruk-hai infantry, all of which is going to come in pretty handy. Some support from the Bandit Javelins. Bandit Javelins is interesting. Under normal circumstances they are simply called Bandits. Those are body piercing projectiles, so the Arthedain Shadow Bows and the Arthedain Rangers choosing now to open up. There's a lot of Corsairs getting over into this part of the battlefield now, but I don't know necessarily if this is worth dumping a bunch of Ranger ammunition into, but the normal way of thinking, I guess, has to be suspended for a battle like this, when you consider what the compositions are. Outer Legion have gone, although this, you can see that more clear battle lines are going to be drawn. There's a lot of routing going on here from the Arthedain units. The Hobbits are still continuing to fight. Some of the Arthedain units are still there. I mean, a big part of this has got to be the amount of throwing projectile damage that is going on. This, however, is going to be very, very key, a very nasty position for the fireworks, aka the Watcher, to be in. They can shoot right up the main road that leads to the Golden Horn. The defenders don't really have a choice but to station their units here, so this would be an ideal time, I think, to just continuously use that artillery to the best of your ability. It's not going to kill off individual units in their entirety like other artillery units can, but the amount of proportional damage you can do as an entire force based on that artillery unit is very significant. Meanwhile, this front line continues to be just fine. Interestingly enough, the neutrals have got access to bandits and bandit javelins. The difference between the two units? Don't know. But there you have it. Arthedain Rangers. They have an ideal position to shoot down in there, but again, it's just regular Corsairs. Is this the best use of ammunition? We've seen several times in the past, defenders have come to rue using ammunition maybe a little bit too freely. Elder Archers firing away as well. I mean, you can see that there are huge amounts of Corsairs down here now, starting to return fire into the defending positions, Corsair Crossbowman as well, so by no means the highest quality of arrows. Nice hit there into the Uruk-hai pikemen, but the sheer volume of them is going to prove to be a problem for the defenders in the long run. Adding stuff like Proudfoot Protectors in there as well is only going to increase the problem. This is where the real danger of the attacking skirmishes lies, after all. The crossbows, Proudfoots and the Uruk-hai, and the Corsairs. Such a dangerous tool. I never really covered Medieval 2 Standard on my channel all that much, but I do remember the crossbows from Standard Medieval 2. Very different. It's amazing how different this game actually now feels to Standard Med 2, even though it's got the same mechanics at its base. But if you were to go back and play Med 2, you can definitely tell the difference is fairly substantial at this point. So many iterations into a sub-mod. Guardians, I mean, they're going to do a lot of damage in return to all of these completely unarmoured Corsairs. Against lightly armoured units like this, Elves can be absolutely devastating, cleaving through them like a hot knife through butter, but the armour piercing will not be completely wasted in return, and as always in battles like this, it's a numbers question for the attackers. Can they continue to stoke the fires of their attack over an elongated period of time? The Gwaith Arthand are now in melee, 26 of them remain, so they weren't slain to the last man by the mighty Steel Bowman. Remember that? Remember when the Steel Bowman as well had 17 missile damage? Wild times. Arthedain Men-at-Arms are also now going to be reinforcing this front line. Again, you can see the difference in approach here. Numbers on one side, more quality on the other. Numenor going to be coming down here as well to help reinforce the front line with some Alcarolas Legion. There's still reinforcements waiting outside the walls, so they are by no means a spent force. But as expected, perhaps, this isn't going to be a battle where too many punches are being pulled. Ooh, hello. Yeah, once again, the Watcher starting to do its thing. Even the units, or the projectiles, I should say, that are going along.
They have lost half their men.
Still hitting nicely. Trolls of the White Hand, I mean, they are very good among trolls, but going after elven infantry units and black walls are going to take a lot of damage in melee, but I can also hear, even amongst the cacophony of the battle noises, the whistle of these crossbow bolts, and they're in such an ideal position here, even with the quality being so far in the favour of the defenders here. I think the damage that the crossbows and the artillery and the attackers are able to do from this position, I think that's going to prove to be maybe a little bit too much. Meanwhile, the neutrals now sending forward their Ents, and alongside their Drake Broodlings, it's going to be an easy matter to clean up what remains of the Rhudur marksmen. Easy enough task to kill them, but there's a lot of Numenorians that wait for them this way, so it's not going to be all over for them. In fact, I think the Numenorians there may be better prepared than any other defensive position that still stands over on this side of the defenders. The defenders still able to disbar the way with a lot of infantry for the time being, but you have to wonder for how long they're going to be able to keep this up. Corsair crossbows, again, like, if you can utilise the entirety of a crossbow unit's ammunition as the attackers in a way that is reasonably effective, it's always going to be pretty difficult to see how the defenders are going to win. But then again, the overall quality of the attacking armies on an average is low enough to the point where they might not have the martial might to see themselves over the line. Imladris archers.
The enemy are badly bloodied.
Not useless in melee with those armor-piercing clubs either, but again, when you see units of over 100 breaking in the face of the units that are in front of them, you do have to worry a little bit. The attacks do need to continue, even if their projectiles are being used pretty efficiently. Troll Axler is out of ammunition with that unit, but another one moves forward. Really one of the gems of the Rhudur roster, the Troll Axlers. They're always so effective if you can get them throwing. They are fragile both at range and melee, but the damage they can do with their throwing axes is so significant. This front line is probably the only one from the defenders that was sat up right from the beginning which has maintained its current position throughout the battle so far. And with more support coming in from range, that is only going to continue to be the case, especially with the level of quality that they still have on this front line. Dundland scouts are moving in, they're going after the Troll Axe throwers, trying to lessen the effect their DPS can have a little bit. Meanwhile, the Drake Broodlings just bulldozing through the flagging defenders at the top of the hill and now able to attack from the rear / the side. There's a large amount of pressure coming from the attackers up this direction as well. The Broiling River Ward's defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. There's only 14 of them remaining, so that's not too surprising there. But the mighty Gwaiti Mirde are also starting to struggle, so out of ammunition ranges are being committed to the front line as well. The Wild Horde has been slowed for the time being, but you get the distinct impression that it's not going to be stopped indefinitely. Pandemonium Berserkers are going to be trying to do some damage from afar fairly quickly, and then they can also be very useful in melee. Belagire archers, don't worry, you can't catch it through the microphone. It's interesting. This watchtower has been damaged, I guess from a stray shot from the Watcher. Well, a nice firing position here from the Numenorians, able to shoot down the way. Using Flaming Shot. I don't think... Flaming Shot only has an effect on morale, so, I mean, thematically, it looks pretty cool against the Ents. I don't think it's going to be the way to do things. But the Numenorian steel bows, actually, this is one instance in which the steel bows will be very, very efficient, because they're armor-piercing arrows. They'll be able to shoot faster, and the armor-piercing will get through that armor that the Spears of Orthanc have. So as strong a unit as these Dundland Crossbowmen are, this is an instance in which the Numenorian steel bows, who usually are quite a difficult unit to use, are going to find their niche. Meanwhile, this front line continues to hold for the time being, and especially with the addition of something as savage as the Witch Realm Enslavers, that armor piercing will do a nice amount of damage to the Uruk-hai that now find themselves on the front line. Again, we're seeing more routing. Bows and arrows starting to rain down from on high. Victory seems certain for the Frownheim Berserkers, since they added themselves to the front line too. Obviously very, very deadly. Not the easiest of angles for the Proudfoots, but again, more of these bolts are what the attackers need at this point to start reclaiming the momentum of this fight.
Only half our force remains.
Elder Swordmass, I mean, against these kind of units, against the Hobbits, they would be very, very good. They're going to carve their way through them, but they're going to need support. The best kind of support is on the way, however, from the Pharaohs and Swordmasters, so you can see already the Hobbits losing their stomach for the fight in the face of the mighty warriors that they are now faced with. But if they can hold their nerve here, the Hobbits, then they should still be able to do enough damage for the next wave to be successful. You can see this front line ultimately has been dealt with, due in no small part again to ranged support. That's the name of the game. Keeping the attacks chugging along with a steady stream of low-tier units to be fed into the meat grinder, and then doing the real damage with the ranged units. When you've got this level of melee units to work with, this is always how it's going to be as attackers, especially with how bizarre some of the attacking compositions are. Again, over here it's looking a little bit thin on the ground again, but the attackers have started to maybe lose Steve over here as well. Go down the hill to push hunters. There's some... I did see Longbottom Mob who are going to be throwing their pebbles in. More pikemen are on the way up the hill, so a steady stream of units are still making their way up here, but if you look out further, some more reinforcements yet to come from Isengard, but I don't really see much in the way of an attack happening down this way. Numenor is simply going to be too strong, I think. Well, not much of a successful attack, I would imagine, although the neutrals are going to give it a good go by the looks of things, and Numenor are actually coming back just a little bit, with Ents moving forward. The Mountain Uruk pikemen. The pikemen are a really interesting one here, because I don't know, stats-wise, where they fall among the current meta. They could be disgustingly overpowered for all I know. Obviously the general stats of units change as a whole with large-scale patches, and it's been a long time since the Mountain Uruk pikemen were an intended part of the game. So I don't know whether their numbers match up positively or negatively with what the game expects nowadays, but surely this is going to be where the Ents fall away though, with the strength of the Numenorian units around them. This is going to be a little bit of a fairer tilt at this angle though than I was expecting it to be. One of the defending generals falls by the wayside. Numenorian steel bows, looks like they've used up their ammunition, they've got their swords and shields drawn. There's one of my archers shooting down the hill. Poison projectiles also being introduced here and there. So far, by far and away, the most vulnerable morale-wise have been the attackers. and that was always going to be the case. Rhudur may have some slight weaknesses in morale, but as the defenders you're always going to be able to fight the morale war a little bit more efficiently than your attacking counterparts. Especially when you're talking about factions like Numenor and Imladris as well, they're generally going to stand and fight until the fight is lost. If you're suffering a chain rout as Imladris, you can pretty much see that the battle has already gotten away from you in physical terms. And the mental war was not where it was all lost for you. Numenor pushing onto the enemy. This is a large amount of units that you can see here. Corsair Archers continuing to offer their support, the poison projectiles from the Mark-friendly bows. This is still where we may yet see this battle won and lost. It's very hard to gauge skirmishes and how effective they're really being, unless you can see, like, witches. Obviously it's immediately apparent the devastation they can cause, but even with crossbows you can do their damage reasonably quickly. It's only at the end of a battle when you see the outcome and then potentially the numbers in the splash screen at the end you can see how truly effective they were based on how expensive they are. The crossbows are always going to be a good choice on a map like this. And so far, the old adage about more open settlement and attacking skirmishes being more effective is coming true once again. I do think if the defenders are going to go on to win this, it will be because of the shortfall in quality that the attackers suffer with their infantry as a result of the bizarre armies that we see before us today. How are Numenor getting on over here? They are going to commit all that they have over here now. Pikeman defeat seems certain, so they're clearly not overpowered. Some Proudfoots moving in, there's still more reinforcements to come. I don't think that Numenor intended to hold this position indefinitely, however. Imladris sentries, one unit of them going that way, one unit of them going this way. I mean, you can see already that the defenders now are getting pretty badly stretched as we enter the final 10,000 braves. Axguard, so the few units of genuine quality that Umbar had at their disposal are now being committed forward. The armour piercing trying to make a bit of a difference against the mighty Pharazim Swordmasters. Still 17 of them remaining. It may not seem like a long time, but they must have cut their way through an awful lot of units, considering there are very few hobbits that still stand over here. Many of them will have run, but a significant amount of them won't, and they will have simply been butchered instead. Enslavers feasting upon yet more hobbits. I mean, this is the thing, in certain parts of the battlefield it does look as though the attacks are starting to run a little bit low on manpower, but they still have the crossbows support, they still have a few units here and there which can be utilised to good effect. They are still being held thoroughly in check on this choke point over here, mind you. The Numenorian heavy infantry in particular has proven its worth in this battle so far. Routing, is that? Yeah, 55 Corsair pikemen. The last thing you want from your pikes is routing as well. They're very often the anchor to your line. A way of equalising against far superior opposition, and when faced with Numenorian infantry you don't want to be seeing your long pointy boys running the wrong way. Imladris sentries in position on these two roads. It is still over here where you worry a little bit for the defenders. Looks like the Numenorians, Arthedain Sentinels are doing something. Numenorian Shield Guard trying to push through the lines, I'm not entirely sure why. Mercenary War Chiefs getting involved. Two-handed sword. Going to be a little bit more impressive against the ever-solid Numenorian infantry. Spears of Warthank is still alive in spite of the... Actually, there were two units on them, weren't there? Either way, they received a bit of a savaging that has the steel bows, but again, perhaps the lower ammunition count proving to be an issue. The God-Holy firing. Silverthorn arrows going out to the Corsair Archers. Corsair pikemen are still back down there as well. would come Isengard. Perhaps this is the last wave of reinforcements Isengard had. That was the stuff they were holding in reserve, perhaps as a final gambit to try and crack these front lines once and for all. Another block of Uruk-hai infantry, and then obviously this very solid unit is the Guards of Orthanc. Much more difficult to get rid of than most of the units the defenders have been fighting off so far. Harbinger and Castamere on the front line as well, a more aggressive bodyguard unit. See the Numenorian variant of the Temporal Guard getting involved now as well, swords drawing. Maybe a little bit more of an air of desperation about the defenders now though. Perhaps this final wave is what it's going to take to lay them low. 17 Mark 20 bows. A depleted unit, but perhaps the poison projectiles will prove to be useful nonetheless. Just continuing the force march up this hill really, the attackers, to try and keep the assault going. And Corsairs. They just need to keep this attack going really for just a little bit longer, because I do think that the attackers are going to be able to push their way through over here. Lots of these units that are further down the hill are out of ammo skirmishers. I mean, aside from the last wave from Isengard, it's just a few Hobbit remnants here and there, but this might be all it takes, especially given the fate of Numenor on the other side. I would still be a little bit reticent to call the attackers' favourites in this battle if it weren't for the fact that Numenor did appear to be on their last legs over here, although I don't really know what the neutrals are doing. They haven't really done a fantastic job at finishing their dinner, for lack of a better term. The Mercenary War Chiefs not able to get the job done, even with the support of these pikes, so maybe it is the old units that have been forgotten in the mists of time, have actually got inferior stats, at least in these examples. To be fair though, they are going up against very strong Numenorian units, so you can't really complain too much if you end up losing to them, but Numenor will be fairly happy with their day's work there. Uruk-hai pikemen still the very depleted archers at this point, just doing their best to kill as many of the attackers before they arrive on the front line as they possibly can. In many ways, I think this has been highly atypical, but perhaps it's also been one of the most typical examples of an EDORAS battle we've seen as well. Very damaging for the attackers, and yet there's been no point in this battle where I thought they were going to be the ones losing it. And I think that's probably the best way we can describe my expectations of most fights on EDORAS. Difficult for the defenders, to be sure, and in many ways actually a mass cavalry sally out to catch the attackers off guard, perhaps. It's one of the ways in which you can make this battle significantly less easy to predict. Even with the weird compositions here, I think it has followed a similar trajectory to how you would expect a regular EDORAS fight to go.
Very much in our favour. Victory will be ours.
That final wave from Isengard really was the hammer blow, I think, to the defending efforts over on the front end of the Golden Horn over here. And this is finally going to bring about the end of the brave defence that was led by that unit of Numenorian shield gun, and had other units around them as well, like the Tron Slavers doing damage, but I mean, they may have only been going up against largely Corsair units and other such low-end stuff, but there was a high volume of units that they had to hold back, but their resistance is finally coming to an end. Now I'm going to be able to move forward. Numenorian General falls, the Pharazim Swordmasters showcasing themselves to be very difficult to finish off once again, fighting back to back against several units of pikes, which does of course mean that they're not going to be able to get much damage done now before they inevitably fall. The fact there's still so many pikes as well though does mean that as much as, I mean, this is a fairly intimidating sight. The elven shield bearers, the pikes sticking through the gaps, the neutrals scaling the hill of what they have on, finally able to finish off the Numenorians. Took a little bit longer than they would have been happy with, I'm sure, but they are now here. They are going to be able to pressure on this side of the town centre as well. They're going to try and shoot them point blank, but Imladris are not going to give them the satisfaction of that, which is exactly what you like to see. We will end this fight in melee combat. This is where Imladris Sentry is not really the sort of thing as the attackers you want to see as the cornerstone of a final stand, because they are going to be more difficult to dislodge than pretty much anything else the defenders had in their repertoire, but well, Proudfoot's going to try and get in position to use more of their range support. The Guards of Orthanc will not take too much damage at the hands of even Elven pikes, you would suggest, because of their very high defensive values, but they are actually going to leave the front line and maybe go pike to pike with them. They have a higher volume of pikes, and that is what I think is... I mean, they could just try and force their way through shields, could they? Well, perhaps not actually. Perhaps that would be a foolish idea. There's sort of plenty of pikes though, they've even got some of the standard Corsairs. They're going to have to loop their shots with stuff like the Proudfoots, which is less than ideal. Longbottom mob with their throwing projectiles might be slightly better off. The Guards of Orthanc maybe going to try and squeeze their way through a gap. I mean, this is how you should be dealing with pikes, not allowing them to hold you at arm's length, and there is a little bit of a gap here that they can take advantage of. These armour-clad Dunlanders are going to be able to muddy the waters significantly now. I mean, over here on this side of things, the neutrals should be outright defeated, you would suggest, from Imladris' defensive posture. Maybe the wildest thing I've ever seen if the defenders were to pull out a victory from here, but I think they would need to unveil some kind of range support unit that they've been keeping in reserve in order for it to be truly attainable. If they can turn all of these pikes around and get them on the front line quickly enough. But this is the problem. I mean, this front line is now folding, so yeah, I think I'm trying to look for ways in which the defenders could have maybe come back from this, but the Guards of Orthanc squeezing through that little gap was, I think, the final nail in the proverbial coffin. The odd pebble being thrown in, going after routing Rhudur units, but I guess you may as well throw them in at this point. Elgar units incoming Harbingers of Castamere, what remains of the Dunedain scouts also going to move in. I mean, this is something that the AI tends to do in campaign mode as well, where they will send all of their units up front to try and just bulldoze you out of the way. Cavalry actually does make a big difference when you're doing that, because they are high mass units. The problem is though, with most defensive positions including spears and pikes, when they do get to the front of these mass pushes, they tend to get massacred very, very quickly, so I don't know if I would recommend doing that in a multiplayer sense, especially when other players can very easily see through. There are some times perhaps when the AI's occasional brain deadness could also be viewed as genius. Spears in effect shooting at point blank. Any kills they can get at this point are just going to be a nice bonus for their allies as they move forward. A bizarre fight, but for now it's just the trudge to the end. There isn't really a good or evil in this situation, so it's hard to tell whether evil has won and has conquered the Golden Hall or not. I guess the most evil faction of all, and well, the most evil race of all in the Hobbits were on the attacking force, so you can only surmise that evil is indeed going to be victorious as a result of the attackers' victory here. Still got Halim in there. Didn't know they were still alive, but there's only 9 of them, so it isn't going to matter too much. All of these units that were perpetually mounting are now going to come back, but all that's going to be is that they're going to be forcibly slain now. Stuff like gunmen, hunters and scattered granadine pikemen is not going to be enough to turn the tide of the battle either. Crownfoot protectors. Shooting at some units that are now trying to arrive from this angle. Some Alcarondas Legion that were fighting in other parts of the settlement and forgotten about. A few bolts, a few pebbles thrown their way. They actually managed to rout those Longbottom mob, so it goes to show how feeble the Hobbit morale can be sometimes. The Longbottom mob running for the relative safety of a pike block. Here, because Alcarondas Legion may well be the last ones left standing if this continues. Well, maybe not. If they bided their time just a little bit longer, they probably would have, but even though the Corsair pikemen, the few times we've seen them in this battle, maybe haven't acquitted themselves with glory, they should at the very least be perfectly capable of dealing with this unit of Alcarondas Legion. 20 Imladris sentries still remain. These completely colourless banners are something of an eyesore, aren't they? Down. Yeah, the Alcarondas Legion are finished, so they will not be the last one standing. It's hard to tell now which. There's only 3 of them left. The fact they can survive 500 frames is fairly impressive. I don't think we need to. This is all that remains. I mean, having a look at 8% difference, which for a meme battle, as it were, that's not bad at all. I mean, like I said, it's both one of the strangest and yet one of the most ordinary Armies battles I think I've seen. For all the reasons I've already mentioned in the fight. Makes it kind of difficult to discuss, I guess, in a way. I guess I'll just discuss it as I normally would, even though it was probably the intention of the players for it to be not normal, for lack of a better term. But there we go, the attackers victorious and worthy in their victory as well. I mean, it's difficult for the defenders in a situation like this. If you allow yourself to get pegged back, though, and crossbows to hit you, and javelins, and it's always going to be difficult, and the Watcher as well, the firework launcher from the Hobbits. It's always going to be difficult, and I think that's why cavalry on a map like this can be so important, because it gives you a tool to not allow the attackers to basically play that game that they want. It does also come with its risks, of course, because if you end up wasting your cavalry, the battle may as well be over, because it's such a high amount of resources that you have to spend on bringing cavalry to the field that it can end up being a waste, especially with the balance of the game being as it is at the moment, and single HP cavalry being significantly more difficult to use than it should be. It can make it difficult, but perhaps that's one of the things that we will see going into the next patch change a little bit. But the attackers use their crossbows and their ranged units and their artillery very, very well, and that's why they deserve to win, really. Especially considering their infantry force wasn't really up to the task in the same way, you have to say. So they were forced in many ways to rely a little bit more heavily on their ranged units, but it certainly did the business for them. So let's see what did the damage for Y2K's Arthedain army. Warns of the North, 141 kills. At least a handful of those would have been on Gwaith the Arthhound at range. And then in melee, of course, with their longswords, they are ever a dependable high-tier unit as well. Nothing else breaking 100 kills for him, but several getting close. Dunedain Scouts, actually, the other one. So more of a workhorse army, this, which is not too surprising, although Proudfoot Protectors not breaking 100 kills could be considered slightly surprising, but I can imagine that a large amount of the kills that Froggy got was probably from his Proudfoot Protectors, perhaps Medexa as well. I wouldn't be too surprised. And then, of course, Umbar and Isengard have got their own crossbows too, so again, all of the attacking armies had access to crossbows as well, which on a map like this, there are times where crossbows are not going to serve attackers all that well on settlements where it's more difficult to get your skirmishes into play. But EDORAS is not one of those settlements, so it's always going to be hard. So it was an uphill struggle for the defenders, and it was not one that they were able to conquer ultimately. But still, nice to see such weird compositions utilised on the field today, and it's also interesting to see units from a bygone age rear themselves again in the Neutrals faction. So yeah, big thank you to Y2K for sending this one in. Big thank you as well to all of the players for being a part of this battle replay. My schedule has changed somewhat, probably in a positive way for the channel actually, as a result of my my infection, because it means that there's no way I can get sent away effectively for this round of this potential round of field work in my workplace. So that means that I'm going to be here a little bit more readily to be able to record stuff. So I'm certainly not going to run my backlog dry, essentially, in the way that I have been doing over the course of the entire summer, really. So that's something worth celebrating. It does mean that I'm going to be able to plan out my recording a little bit more easily. Now, obviously, it's not ideal, like, you know, recording as I am, but it's not horrendous either. So I think we'll continue like this. I think the very next battle that we do will be that Silmarillion one that I've been talking about. And from then on, it'll just be a case of, I've got other battles I've been sent as well in Reforged that I can leaf through the backlog and pull out as and when needed. And you never can tell, like, oftentimes if I do get sent anything from the new patch, even if it's just a quick showcase, not necessarily a battle, then that obviously gets booted to the front of the queue pretty quickly. So that's the sort of thing that I can't really account for. But yeah, other than that, nothing else really to report. I mean, yeah, it is what it is. Big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.